Imagine this, you're a farmer in Oregon, breathing in the chilly morning air, the year 1945. The war raged thousands of miles away, its thunder merely newspaper headlines and the crackle of the radio in your living room. For you, the war meant gasoline rationing coupons, nothing more. But today, it came to you, from the sky. Breaking the ringing silence, something enormous falls. Silent. A 30-foot paper dome slowly descends onto your field. Rustling like a giant ghost, you step closer, shivers running down your spine from the unreality. The absurdity of it. You don't know what it is. You couldn't possibly know. But you are looking at the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile. Only it's made of paper. And therein lies the main chilling paradox of this story. While the United States was developing the Manhattan Project and building armadas of B-29 superfortress bombers, entire steel cities in the sky bristling with machine guns, each costing a fortune, the Japanese Empire, whose economy was gasping in the throes of resource starvation, found an asymmetric response. It found a way to strike across the entire Pacific Ocean, and for that, it needed no roaring engines, no alloy steel, no tons of aviation fuel, only hand-glued washi paper, glue made from the ground konnyaku plant root, and the invisible wind, a free highway at 10,000 meters. This is a story of how the most primitive weapon, born of desperation and centuries-old ingenuity, challenged the most powerful industrial nation on the planet. It was a hack attack, executed before computers were even invented. By the end of this story, you will learn how a secret sky river, which even American meteorologists didn't suspect existed, became Japan's primary weapon. Why an army of ordinary Japanese schoolgirls, suffering from cold and hunger in unheated workshops, manually built over 9,000 of these silent bombs, each a small tragedy, and how the total silence in American newspapers and on the radio became the most devastating counterattack in this invisible war. A complete information blackout, a weapon that proved more effective than any air defense system, because it struck not at the bombs themselves, but at the very target of the attack, your fear. The year is 1944. Despair hung heavy in the smoke-filled offices of the Japanese General Staff. The fleet lay at the bottom of the ocean, industry suffocated without steel and oil. Major General Sueyoshi Kusaba looked at the maps. On them, American might was drawn in bold, undeniable lines. Japanese power, meanwhile, melted like watercolour in the rain. He understood the conventional war was lost. An unthinkable idea was needed, a hack of reality itself, and he found a vulnerability. If you don't have steel for ships, you use what you have in abundance. And Japan had paper for centuries, and it had the sky. Kusaba's idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Turn the sky into a new ocean, and a paper balloon into a silent ghost warship. This weapon, born in the depths of the secret Noborito Institute, was codenamed Fugo. And it wasn't just a balloon, it was an autonomous killer. Imagine its brain. Engineers created a primitive but foolproof onboard computer made of gears and wire. A barometric altimeter connected to P. 32 sandbags worked like clockwork. Did the balloon descend too low in the cold night air? An electromagnetic mechanism would release a sandbag of ballast. Did the balloon rise too high under the rays of the daytime sun, causing the hydrogen inside to expand? A clever valve would hiss quietly, venting excess gas. It self-corrected. It thought. The world's first autonomous kamikaze drone assembled from paper, glue and ropes, but the most chilling, most visceral detail of this machine was hidden in the glue. Do you know the taste of despair? The washi paper panels were glued together with a viscous compound made from the ground konnyaku root, similar to a potato. Amidst the total famine sweeping Japan, the workers in these secret factories, mostly young girls, schoolgirls, were sometimes forced to eat this tasteless raw earth-smelling glue, simply to survive, to quiet the gnawing emptiness in their stomachs and last another day. They were building a weapon of retribution, literally eating it piece by piece. And so the weapon was ready, cheap, mass-produced, made from scraps and ingenuity. Thousands of bombs, 15-kilogram high-explosive and incendiary devices were already suspended from the paper domes. They awaited their moment. But one last crucial question remained. How to deliver this fragile, fire-carrying cargo 10,000 kilometers across the largest ocean on the planet, without engines, without pilots, without a single drop of fuel. The answer awaited them at an altitude of 10 kilometers, about 33,000 feet, in the thin, freezing cold, in an invisible river flowing directly across the sky at breakneck speed. This story began long before the war, in the quiet of the 1920s. Japanese meteorologist Wasaburo Oishi, launching weather balloons from Mount Fuji to study the weather, noticed something inexplicable. At the foot of the mountain, the grass barely stirred, dead calm. But high above, his instruments went wild, registering hurricane-force winds that blew with incredible stability, always to the east. For decades, while the world built battleships and tanks, the Japanese quietly and methodically launched thousands of such probes. They weren't just studying the weather. They mapped the invisible. They discovered a giant roaring river in the sky. Today we call it the high-altitude jet stream. But forget that boring scientific term. Imagine not just a highway, but as a roaring torrent of icy air in the stratosphere. A cosmic conveyor belt that the planet itself created for them. The wind in this river speeds at over 300 kilometers and 85 miles per hour. It was the perfect free nature-given delivery system. If a Fugo paper balloon was lifted to the right altitude, the Sky River would carry it across the Pacific Ocean. 10,000 kilometers, about 6,200 miles, in just 3 days. Faster than any aircraft carrier, without a single drop of fuel. And here lies the most elegant hack of this war, its main military paradox. As soon as hostilities began, the United States imposed strict radio silence on all weather reports. Logical. They thought this technological wall would protect them, to prevent the enemy from knowing the weather. But the effect was precisely the opposite. American meteorologists were, in essence, blinded. They only saw local data, losing the big picture over the ocean. The Japanese, thanks to their pre-war maps, knew more about the weather over North America than Americans themselves. They turned America's information fortress into its own prison. The weapon was ready. The delivery method found. But now, General Kusaba faced a new, almost impossible task. For the attack to have any psychological effect, it had to be massive, not a trickle, but an entire swarm of these unmanned killers eclipsing the sun. The plan called for producing not 100 or 1,000, but over 9,300 of these complex devices, manually, in a country where there was no labour, no metal, no food left. And so the empire turned to its last, youngest, and most fragile reserve. The scene was surreal. Imagine a sumo arena where giants had clashed just yesterday. Today, the military had transformed it into an assembly workshop. Instead of the roar of fans and the thud of bodies, only the dry, ceaseless rustling of paper. On the cold floor, row after row, sat hundreds of girls in dark school uniforms. Monotonously, hour after hour, they glued thin paper panels, their fingers, numb with cold, covered in sticky paste, quickly and precisely joined the parts of a future giant. They worked in silence. Each thought of her own things, home, food, a brother at the front. But their hands moved in a unified, practiced rhythm. This was a silent army of Japanese schoolgirls. The empire streamlined the system with ruthless military efficiency. A total mobilization of high school girls swept across the country. They were pulled directly from their lessons, torn from blackboards with kanji and mathematical formulas, and sent to secret facilities. The entire country became one giant factory. Production was broken down into stages, like on Ford's assembly lines. Some groups cut the washi paper, others glued it into long strips, checking every centimetre. Still others joined these strips into a massive, almost living spherical shell. Their slender fingers, accustomed to calligraphy brushes, now created a weapon, every seam of which had to withstand the icy hell of the stratosphere and the transoceanic flight. But here's the main, most cruel twist of this story. They didn't know what exactly they were building. The level of secrecy was absolute. The girls were told they were constructing weather balloons for meteorological study, that was all. Not once in those cold halls were the words bomb or America uttered. An unspoken truth hung around them, a heavy, oppressive silence that no one dared to break. They were simultaneously the creators of the weapon and its first victims, victims of total disinformation, sincerely believing they were helping their country through difficult times. They were cogs in a machine without seeing the entire machine. November 1944. The first balloons, assembled by their hands, were ready. At secret launch sites along the coast in the pre-dawn gloom, teams began their work. The hollow, low hiss of hydrogen filled the paper domes, making them slowly come alive and grow, like ghostly mushrooms in the fog. The final click of a metal carabiner, securing the 15-kilogram payload of death. The command, release, and the balloon, without a sound, without fire, or smoke smoothly soared upward, becoming a distant speck and dissolving into the invisible sky river. Their long, silent journey eastward had begun. The first reports were like the ravings of a madman. In the icy silence of Montana's forests, to the crunch of snow, a logger stumbled upon a giant fallen leaf of silky paper. In Wyoming, a farmer scouting his property found a tangled mess of ropes and a strange aluminum mechanism covered in frost. In Oregon, something fell onto power lines, causing a short circuit. A military patrol in Alaska reported a strange parachute made of oiled paper. People all along the west coast and even deep inland, as far as Michigan, found these mysterious debris. No one could connect these dots on the map. It looked like debris from another planet. Imagine the authorities' bewilderment. The FBI and military intelligence were scrambling to solve the puzzle. The first theory, sabotage, perhaps from German submarines. Initially, no one believed the idea that these fragile objects could have flown across the entire Pacific Ocean from Japan itself. It sounded like science fiction. It was technologically impossible. Geology held the key. Experts analysed the sand from the found ballast bags and came to a shocking conclusion. Its unique composition, its minerals, its microscopic shell fragments, unequivocally pointed to the beaches of Honshu Island. The impossible had become fact, but the debris kept increasing. The statistics were undeniable. From November 1944 to April 1945, Japan launched over 9,300 balloons. By the most conservative post-war estimates, about 1,000 of them reached North America. They were found from Alaska to Mexico. This was no accident. It was a real, methodical, silent invasion. An invisible armada had crossed the ocean, and statistical maps in Air Force headquarters were covered with red dots, forming a frightening, spreading pattern. And here, the threat ceased to be hypothetical. The Japanese's main target wasn't cities, it was your forests. The incendiary bombs were meant to cause massive forest fires, divert resources to fighting them, and sow widespread panic. The American military faced a completely new challenge. How do you fight a weapon made of paper, riding on the wings of the wind? Fighters were mobilized to combat it, but shooting down a slow, almost stationary balloon at extreme altitude proved to be a nightmare for pilots. Bullets simply pierced the thin envelope, causing no damage. Planes risked stalling and spinning. Even scientists from the top-secret Manhattan Project were brought in for the investigation. And it turned out that the most effective weapon against paper bombs wasn't fighter planes or anti-aircraft guns. It was silence. In a small town in Wyoming, a local newspaper editor sat in his office. The air was thick with the acrid scent of lead, printing ink, and bitter, cold coffee. Outside, an icy wind rattled the window pane. Suddenly, the teletype machine sprang to life, its sharp metallic clatter breaking the silence. The machine spit out a narrow strip of paper with a dry rattle. It wasn't a frontline report, it was a directive from Washington, from the Office of War Information. The text was short, mercilessly clear. Any mention of strange balloons, explosions in forests, or unexplained fires forbidden from publication completely. The editor reread the message, feeling the weight of federal authority pressing down on his humble newsroom. He knew something was happening. Farmers called, their voices lowered to whispers on the phone. Now the government was ordering him to lie with deafening silence. And he looked at the blank space of tomorrow's issue, understanding that the biggest story unfolding right above his readers' heads would never be printed. The logic of the American authorities was cold and calculated. Military analysts quickly understood the physical damage from the paper bombs was a statistical anomaly. The Japanese's true weapon was panic, a psychological poison. And to sustain this fear, the Japanese command desperately needed feedback. They needed to know where their balloons landed. Did they cause fires? Did they sow terror? That's why the Office of War Information implemented a strategy of information suppression. A brilliant solution. No newspaper, no radio station was to report a successful hit. By depriving Japan of its eyes and ears on the American continent, they turned Operation Fugo into an expensive and meaningless shot in the dark. Every launched balloon flew into an absolute informational void. And it worked. It worked with devastating effectiveness. In Japan, in the smoke-filled staff rooms, General Kusaba and his officers waited weeks for news. They listened intently to the crackle of American radio broadcasts, sifted through newspapers from neutral countries, but in response, a deafening silence. No reports of forest fires. No reports of panic. Nothing. From the perspective of the Japanese command, over 9,000 launched balloons, on which their last resources had been spent, simply vanished into the ocean. The project seemed a complete, crushing failure, and in the spring of 1945, lacking any proof of success, the Fugo program was quietly shut down. The Americans won, but they didn't win with the roar of fighter jets. They won with a weapon that didn't exist. Silence. An information vacuum is indeed a powerful weapon, but it has a reverse, darker side. It blinds not only the enemy, but also its own citizens, leaving them in blissful ignorance. Across the western United States, people continued to live their lives, unaware that death could fall on them from a clear sky. They didn't know that a large pale bubble caught in a pine tree top wasn't the remnants of a weather balloon. It was a bomb. The government made a calculation. The risk of panic outweighed the risk of isolated casualties. But this silence, which saved the country from mass hysteria, left every individual defenseless. And this defenselessness, born of state secrecy, would very soon turn into tragedy. On a quiet, sun-drenched forest clearing in Oregon, May 5th, 1945. It was an idyllic Saturday, fragrant with pine needles and damp earth. Pastor Archie Mitchell and his pregnant wife Elsie decided to have a picnic for the children from their Sunday school. They drove into the forest, their favourite spot. While Archie parked the car, Elsie and 5 children, Dick, Jay, Edward, Joan and Sherman, ran ahead, laughing. A few minutes later, Archie heard an excited shout. They had found something large, white, strange lying on the ground. The children gathered around it, curious. One of them pulled at the structure, trying to move it off the path. And at that moment, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. Sharp like the crack of a whip, it silenced all other sounds. When the acrid, sulphur-smelling smoke cleared, 6 bodies lay on the scarred earth. Elsie Mitchell and the 5 children. They died instantly, and here the story ceases to be just a collection of facts. Elsie Mitchell and the 5 children from her Sunday school became the only victims of enemy attack on the continental United States throughout World War II. Until that day, the threat of paper balloons was a statistical anomaly for the Pentagon, a technical problem, another secret file. After May 5th, this threat now had names, ages, and faces. There were crushed children's toys and a bloodied Bible. These were no longer just incidents to be recorded in reports. This was a tragedy that shattered the veil of secrecy with devastating force. The abstract war fought on maps in Washington suddenly became painfully real and unbearably personal. But the cruelest irony is hidden here. They didn't just die from a Japanese bomb, they died because of American censorship. They lived in a state that was one of the main targets for Fugo balloons, but they knew nothing of the danger. No one warned them that a deadly device could be found in the forest near their home. The silence, designed as a shield to protect America from panic, became a trap. And it became the indirect cause of their deaths, the weapon of information control which so successfully defeated the Japanese strategy, backfired in the most tragic way, killing its own citizens it was meant to protect. The deaths of 6 people in Oregon forced the government to act immediately. The wall of silence, so carefully constructed, crumbled overnight. Authorities were forced to partially lift censorship and launch a massive public information campaign. Yesterday's whispers became loud radio warnings and bold newspaper headlines. Posters proclaiming "Danger! Japanese balloon bomb" were distributed nationwide. The threat was named aloud, but simply warning the population was no longer enough. A response was needed, a real military crushing response, and America, shaking off its stupor, threw the full might of its industrial machine against the paper ghosts, and this machine operated with frightening efficiency. Imagine the scene. A top-secret laboratory. The nation's best geologists, some pulled directly from the Manhattan Project, hunched over tables. Their task? Not to split the atom, but to study sand. Yes, ordinary sand from ballast bags. Under electron microscopes, they examined every grain, analysing minerals, diatoms, tiny fossilised shell fragments. They sought a geological fingerprint to pinpoint the exact beach in Japan from which the balloons were launched. The world's greatest scientific power was trying to decipher a weapon made of paper and potato glue. The reaction was utterly disproportionate. The Air Force scrambled P-47 Thunderbolt fighter squadrons. The latest P-61 Black Widow night fighters flew thousands of sorties. Specialized radars, calibrated for slow-moving targets, were deployed. Thousands of Forest Service personnel and Army engineers, including soldiers from the famous 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, scoured enormous territories. The machine fighting a war on two oceans was deployed to combat 9,000 paper balloons. America was not going to lose even this phantom war. And here lies the most incredible paradox. On March 10th, 45, one of the balloons achieved the impossible. It didn't cause a forest fire. It committed microscopic sabotage with macroscopic consequences. A bomb fell on the power lines feeding the Hanford site in Washington state, the top-secret facility producing plutonium for the Fat Man atomic bomb. A short circuit. Emergency systems tripped at the heart of the Manhattan Project. For 3 hours, the American atomic project ground to a halt. Just think about it. A weapon glued together by schoolgirls from paper and glue, for a moment, shut down the most destructive military program in human history. It was the most insane and unintentional success of Operation Foucault. What do we see in the end? A paper armada, launched on its last breath, forced a superpower to expend colossal resources. The threat was minimal, but the response was maximal, almost hysterical. This reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of asymmetric warfare, where actual damage is less important than the psychological leverage. And this brings us to the main question. What did this strange war truly mean? Who won? And what lessons did it leave behind? Lessons that echo today in the hum of drones and headlines about cyber attacks. This was a war not just of armies, it was a war of two systems of thought. Two philosophies. On one side, Japan, its weapon was born of total scarcity, of desperation. It didn't build a fleet, it harnessed the wind, it didn't forge steel, it trusted paper. Its engineers didn't calculate ballistics, they read the maps of sky rivers like ancient mariners read the stars. It was the boldest bluff in the history of warfare, a gamble on physics. On the other side, the United States. Its weapons, ruthless industrial might, logistics, and total information control. America didn't respond with fighter jets. It responded with silence. It didn't build a shield, it muted the enemy's microphone. Its primary weapon was not air defense, but control over reality. Japan tried to defeat physics, America defeated psychology. It was a duel of natural forces against controlled knowledge. And now, imagine. Tokyo, many years later. An elderly woman, now a grandmother, takes her grandson to a museum. The war for her is a distant dream, like a childhood nightmare. And there, in a quiet hall, under glass, she sees it. A photograph, a huge white balloon ready for launch, and memory, like an electric shock, pierces through the decades. She's there again, in an unheated workshop, her breath visible in the air, her fingers blue with cold gluing endless sheets of washi paper. She tastes on her tongue that tasteless, starchy flavour of the glue they secretly ate to quiet their hunger. Then she thought she was helping her country, doing something important. And only now, looking at her grandson as he curiously examines the exhibit, does she understand. Her childlike hands were building an intercontinental weapon, and the entire connection between her monotonous labour and its deadly purpose shatters. For her, it's not a story about war, it's a personal story of hunger, cold and paper. From a military perspective, Operation Foucault was a complete failure. It didn't change the course of the war by a single day, but historically it was a frightening prophecy. It left behind an idea, a viral, indestructible idea, that everyone has vulnerabilities, that a giant can be bitten. The paper balloons were the first version, the alpha test of a new kind of war. Today their descendants, made of carbon fibre and plastic, fly over battlefields, controlled via satellite. Today their philosophy lives in lines of code that bring down power grids and financial markets. Foucault didn't just launch 9,000 bombs, it launched a question into the future. What if your next enemy is invisible, cheap, and needs no fuel? It was the birth of a weapon that kills not bodies, but confidence. So, what about this story strikes you the most? Japan's engineering audacity, transforming wind and paper into a weapon of retribution? Or America's strategic genius, which defeated this threat with a deafening total silence? Let me know in the comments.